Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Ashley Jordan. Ashley has done many things throughout her life. She's been a feminist activist, licensed attorney, public speaker, and a stay-at-home mother. Most notably, however, she's a well-published journalist, with her works appearing in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and HuffPost, among others. Today, she lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with her 3 children. Ashley, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for quite a while now.
Likewise, Dave. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
And we got to give a shout out to Chris Mamoni. Chris is fast becoming one of the more well-known podcast connectors in the industry. He excitedly messaged me on Facebook and said, I have a guest that I need to introduce you to. I just did a podcast with her. I think you'll love her. And he set us up and we did a pre-call. And I told you before we recorded, if I could have done the podcast, then I would have, because it was just such a great conversation. And you got just great energy, and you're just a great persona about you. So I'm just glad we're here today, and I'm glad we're doing this, even though I got to share this with my audience. I know my audience thinks I'm perfect, but actually I inadvertently kicked Ashley out of the first Zoom room that I had set up. I was trying to kick her AI note taker out, but I kicked her out instead. And so we had to create a new Zoom link. And fortunately, that wasn't a deal breaker. She just knew that I had made a mistake and everything. But I know my audience thinks I'm perfect, but hey, mistakes happen. But we were able to create another link, and here we are. And I didn't alienate my guests, which is always a good thing.
Well, Dave, I wrote a whole book about being perfectly imperfect. So I love it. I love it. And we persevered. Here we are.
That's right. Yeah. Mistakes are always information, right? I mean, we can learn from that, and we learn not to avoid them and not to beat ourselves up for them. It's just another point of information from which we can use to improve who we are and how we do things. So
Absolutely. I could not agree more.
yeah, well, we've got a lot of territory to cover, and you've got quite an interesting backstory. So I want you to get into that a little bit, to tell us really about the major experience in your life that have shaped your life path and your passions today.
Mm. Well, I think, along our journey, we have moments in our lives that really become moments of truth and moments that are sort of indelibly burned in our hearts and our minds, and really pivotal moments. And so for me, probably the single most life-changing moment of my life involved grief and the loss of my childhood sweetheart and beloved friend, Daniel, when I was 13, and really I was on my 13th birthday. And so that was a moment in my childhood that forever changed me, and I think really took me from the innocence of childhood to sort of the end of that in an instant, right? In a very unexpected, tragic instant. And then, after burying that, because I just didn't have the inner wherewithal and the outer resources to navigate that level of traumatic grief, 24 years later, cruising along in my life at 37 years old and thinking that I had my whole life figured out and that I knew everything about everything. And one unexpected trigger sent 24 years of repressed traumatic grief just crashing into my consciousness and sort of took me from running through my life to down on the ground on my knees overnight. And that really was my crucible, my reckoning. And also, as I write in my book, the beginning of sort of the reclamation of me and my life.
Yeah, I mean, at 13, I can imagine that had to be a hell of an introduction to puberty, to lose the love of your life. Because at 13, and I know just from raising three kids, that's a pivotal age because it's the age where they're stepping into adolescence and they're struggling with a lot of different things with identity, with struggles with independence versus dependence on the family. And then you throw traumatic grief in the midst of that. That had to be, like you said, the end of your childhood as you knew it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, you know, it it really there are moments when we're on these journeys through our lives where that things are happening with an intelligence,
Mhm.
that the way that things are unfolding mean something more than coincidence. And so for me, even at 13, you know, I could have simply said it was just cruel, right? To lose, someone who was so beloved to me, literally, basically the day that I went from a child to a young woman, right? 13 is a marker for us
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
our childhoods. And so to lose that childhood sweetheart, that source of unconditional love and acceptance on the day that I literally went from being a girl to, a young woman, I knew that it wasn't just cruel. I knew that it meant something, that it was supposed to teach me something, that it was a marker for
Mhm.
me. And and it was. And so yeah, it was, but it was also just brutal, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So
Well, in a death avoidant society, we aren't taught how to deal with grief, and especially at 13, you're not thinking about death. You're thinking about the number of years you have in front of you. And, you're focused on, what high school is going to be like. You're focused on, getting through high school, making friends, and then eventually you graduate from high school, you go to college, and it's all career focused. It's like, setting goals for yourself. And really, death is really in our rearview mirror at that point. I remember when I was, you know, 17, 18, 19, I didn't think about death. I thought about life. But the other things we come to realize that death is as much a part of life as life itself. And if we don't reconcile or come to terms with that, we're we're not gonna know how to live. As Maury Schwartz, one of my favorite philosophers, and the subject of Tuesdays with Maury, said that once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. And there's a lot of truth in that. The other thing, and I don't know if this applied to your situation or not, but I know that young adults are very good at compartmentalizing their emotions. I mean, for 1 minute, they can go from crying to anger, and the next minute, this is within minutes, and I've seen this. They go from just like, just interacting without anger, interacting, socially. Was that a big part of why, in terms of why your grief kind of got stuffed? Was that your ability to compartmentalize, or were you focused just more on goal-oriented stuff, or was that all a way for you just to bury what you experienced?
well, I think growing up in the Midwest, and I write about this in a chapter called Midwestern Nice. And I write about this because it is true that just, as a larger culture, we are avoidant when it comes to issues of death and dying. We really don't know how to deal with it. And so we don't. And in so doing, we do all of us a disservice, right?
Yes.
Because for reasons that you just beautifully articulated, I think that's a part of it. But I think also just growing up in this particular region with a culture of Midwestern nice, it is nice on the outside, even when on the inside you're dying, right? And so um, strength becomes keeping it all together externally when internally everything's falling apart. And then you couple that with not just a death, but the death of a child, right? And in a small community where that child was beloved. And so being a child dealing with that, but then being surrounded by adults who have no idea themselves, like that, it's so unnatural for a child to die that even the adults around me, as a kid, you're looking to the adults like, what do we do? Right. And what you're observing is adults just shutting down and being like, we do nothing. Right. We're going to go through the motions of a funeral and things like that. And then we're going to put it away as
Yeah.
fast as we can because it's so gut wrenching. And so, what that ended up actually looking like for me was because it was my 13th birthday, my parents had planned a surprise party, a surprise 13th birthday party for me on the day that we received the phone call that Daniel had died the night before, been killed. And so, you know, the the way that we proceeded was the show must go on, right? We couldn't cancel a birthday party, right? And so as a 13-year-old, having to go to that party and show up and smile as though everything was fine when it was quite literally the worst day of my entire life, still to date, taught me you had to swallow it, right? You
Yes.
had to smile even when you you were dying, literally dying on the inside. And the only indication from that day that something wasn't right was, my father took home movies of that party. And when I got to the party, which, was supposed to be a surprise, you hear him say from behind the camera, that's one sad baby girl today. That's one sad baby girl. And so there's this acknowledgement of that deep sadness, devastation, this awful thing that's just happened. And yet here we are,
Yeah.
all trying to pretend like everything's fine, like the show just goes on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and back in the day after when Daniel died, there weren't the resources that we had now. It was, you talked about Midwestern nice, but it was let's suck it up, let's move on, let's put on appearances, let's appear that everything is normal. And that's part of being death avoidant, but the other part of it is not realizing at that time that it's normal to experience the feelings, experience those feelings deeply, let those feelings just embody you in order for you to work through it. And now that is the philosophy. That's one of the keys towards integration and moving through grief. Back then, that wasn't the case. I want to shift gears for a minute because what I like to do is also, I know how much Daniel meant to you in your life. So I want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience about Daniel and what you remember most about him.
Daniel, when I say that Daniel was beloved in our community, you know, it, I think maybe initially to people it can mean like, oh, of course he was, right? All children are beloved. But Daniel was really beloved in that he had a personality that just stood out. He was extremely funny, charismatic, just a huge, like, even in our class in school, his presence was felt, stood out among his peers. And so he was just so loved and mischievous and, you know, such a star, such a light in so many ways. And so for so many people, my classmates, teachers, you know, his family, just our community as a whole, it was such a loss of this beautiful boy, this beautiful light. And so to feel so loved and seen by someone who was so beloved was just such a gift. And the unconditional love that he showed me at a time in my life where I really didn't feel very lovable, he taught me what true love looks like. And he is the reason today that I've built a life of true love, from my work to my children to my friendships and now to my romantic partnership. Like, I owe Daniel that gratitude. And so what I want to say is his life, his short life, has shown me that we don't have to live a long life to live a meaningful one,
Yes.
right? That leaving a legacy has nothing to do with anything external that we're taught will make our lives meaningful, right? You know, what he did was more significant for me than winning a Nobel Peace Prize, publishing a bestseller. Those things are great and they can absolutely be meaningful, but love is the most meaningful thing we'll ever do. It is the whole point of all of this. And love is the greatest legacy any of us could ever hope to leave behind. And I think that's the biggest, most beautiful message and legacy Daniel has left, imprinted on me and hopefully imprinted on many, many others through sharing his story and sharing this book.
And it sounds like he just had a natural ability to have people gravitate to him. And am I correct in assuming that?
Absolutely. Yes.
And that, I think, is because of the radiance of his soul that allowed him to do that. I'm also sensing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just sensing he was a pretty old soul at 13.
He was a very old soul at 13. Yes, very, very much so. A very deep soul and very powerful, and I think that's still evident today by the fact that, I mean, I have to say, you mentioned me publishing with the New York Times. The story that I published with the New York Times was about him. And so, you know, a quarter of a century after his death, this picture was in the New York Times, and that is a powerful, beloved, magnificent soul. And so it's such a gift to have known him. It's such a gift to pay tribute to him. And it's such a gift to have been loved by him.
Well, and you continue to carry him. You have integrated who he is and the love that he showed you and the unconditional love that he modeled for you. You've carried that into your own work, into your own relationships. And so in that way, he's never gonna die. He's always gonna be a part of what you do, who you are, and who you bring into your life as well too. And they're gonna see that because the unconditional love that he modeled for you is in you now, and that's going to be modeled to everybody else.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I try to live my life like a moving prayer of gratitude for that, because it's true. He really did teach me unconditional love. And I think that's what was so powerful, not just about my grief opening up 24 years after his death, but when it did, it reminded me what true love looks like, because when I buried it at 13, I forgot. Right. And so then I had to reckon with the fact that I was looking at myself and at the life that I had created, and that it really wasn't a reflection of that. But I knew that that existed. I knew I could have it. But the journey was about embodying that, because that is our true nature.
Mhm.
That is who we are and what we're here to do in our own ways, through our own gifts, through our own relationships. And so I had to, through this grief journey, find myself again, find that love, reconnect with it, and then deconstruct this life I had built, right, from the outside in, to rebuild one from the inside out that was a reflection of the love that I had known from childhood.
It makes perfect sense because there is a deconstruction. When we experience traumatic loss, the person we were prior to that loss no longer exists, and we need to really go through the process. And I call it, reevaluate our assumptive world, because our assumptive world gets shattered after traumatic loss. But it's that basically that deconstructing, rebuilding the foundation of who we are after loss to include beliefs, attitudes, thoughts, rules that now reflect our redefined life. And, and it's a process. For you, it was a 24-year process to get to that point. And I need to ask you, as much as you're comfortable sharing about what happened at 37, what was the event that triggered just the just re-expression of grief that you had buried 24 years later after Daniel died?
Well, so the triggering event is so interesting because, at 37, I was an atheist. I didn't believe in I had no spirituality. I didn't believe in anything spiritually. I had a law background. So that taught me to be extremely analytical. I was extremely intellectual. Um, and I spent a lot of time in my head and my thinking mind. And I basically thought I knew everything. Thought I had everything figured out, that my life was set. And so I was on a weekend away at the time with my now ex-husband. He was my husband at the time. And we were walking down this street in a little, like, this quaint little rural town in Illinois called Galena. It's a lovely place for a weekend getaway. And I just looked up, and we were just, kind of, as I say, putzing around. And I looked up, and there was a sign that said psychic medium. And so I just looked at my ex-husband and was like, you want to go in there? You want to go, like, let's just see what happens. Like, I'm thinking this is just some Saturday night entertainment, right? And so we went in, and the man that we met, his name is Chris McBrien, and he's now a good friend of mine, because he changed my life. And he said it was like 5 o'clock on a Saturday night, and he was like, "Look, I'm booked until after 10. But if you want to come back, I could give you a short, maybe like a 20-minute appointment." And it's so funny to me now, because knowing him, I'm like, he would never normally do that. He's very good boundaries around his working hours. So the fact that he offered that is really interesting. But I was like, hey, what? Yeah, we got nothing going. What the heck? Go come back. So we came back, and I sat down, and he looked at me. And the first thing Chris said to me was, "Are you here to talk to the dead?" And I just looked at him like, shocked. No, I think I just sort of said, "I'm here for whatever you offer, sir. I don't know what I'm doing here." And so he saw my kind of shock and discomfort. I was like, "Okay, that's it. Like, we'll just, just give you a little intuitive reading." And so he did, and he went into this reading, and again, atheist. Both my ex-husband and I left like, whoa, like that was something, like, things that he said he could not possibly know. I was a complete stranger, literally off the street. And so it kind of blew our minds a little bit that somebody could, say things that were so spot on, so impossible to know. And so I went home, and those words, like, "Are you here to talk to the dead?" Like, I kept replaying in my mind. And I had no expectation, but it's like I couldn't get that out of my head. And so I think probably 3 or 4 weeks went by. And I just said to my ex-husband, I said, I can't stop thinking about what that man in Galena asked me. I was like, I went online to his website, and I see that he does phone appointments. And I was like, and I'm thinking of just making an appointment and asking him to connect with my friend Daniel, who passed away. And I think that was probably surprising to my ex-husband at the time because I'd never really talked about Dan. I think I'd mentioned the fact of it, but when I say I buried it, I buried it. And so my ex-husband was like, "Sure, why not? What the heck? Why don't you see what happens?" So I did, and I'll say I wasn't prepared, I don't think, for what that appointment was going to be. I was, first of all, shocking to hear a stranger speak about so many aspects of a personal relationship that nobody else knew. Chris recounted things I had never told anybody. Nobody knew, right? There was no way. It wasn't written anywhere. I'd never confided it in anybody. And so that part was just magical and kind of mind blowing. But I always say, when I tell this, it doesn't matter whether you are atheist, it doesn't matter whether you're deeply spiritual, religious, whatever you are. The point of it is that that appointment, my meeting with Chris, brought me back to this part of myself that I had buried, that I had lost. And it was the triggering event that called me home to myself. And once it opened up inside of me, it was like a tsunami. There was no going back. There just really wasn't. And I could say maybe I could have buried it again. Maybe I could have, but there was something deep inside of me that knew it was a journey I had to take, and that it was really a matter of life or death for me, because I'd been going through my life unconsciously with a heart that had been closed, a heart that really wasn't available for anybody else since I was 13. And so this experience was calling me home to sort of open myself again, to connect with my heart again for the first time, to open my heart again for the first time, and to remember the me that I had lost and buried from pain, at 13.
Yeah, and a good evidentiary medium can help individuals get in touch with their grief and work through grief. And Chris obviously sounds like an evidentiary medium because he knew things that only you knew about your relationship with Daniel, about yourself, and he could not have known that otherwise. And I think it was interesting that he asked you to come back, and he was, like you mentioned, he was very protective with his boundaries around his time. It wouldn't surprise me, and again, I can't speak for Chris or speak for you because you were in that situation. It wouldn't surprise me if he was getting a nudge from beyond to have you come back for 20 minutes, and it wouldn't surprise me if that nudge from beyond wasn't Daniel himself.
Oh, absolutely. Like 100%. That's what was happening. 100%. And I think, I'm so, and I'll say, I was not an easy audience, right? I was extremely skeptical. When I say I was in my ego, I thought believing in anything but nothing was absolutely ignorant, right? And I say that now to make fun of myself for my arrogance, because now I'm a deeply spiritual woman, and I also want to say too, and we'll probably talk more about this, but in sharing this story and in the work that I've done, I've met so many people with similar stories. One of my very best friends, her mother lost a childhood sweetheart um, to leukemia. And when he got sick, she was not allowed to be with him. And that says she never even got to say goodbye because he was sort of, um, you know, cocooned, right? And kind of hidden from view. And I watched her just this past Thanksgiving open up about that and at a dinner table and start to share that story and actually start to weep. And this is a woman, you know, in her 60s recounting this, and the pain is still so raw, because she's never been allowed to grieve him. And that love is still there. It is, I would say he's the love of her life still. And so I want to normalize that for people. And I want to also say there's nothing wrong with you for feeling grief decades later, especially when you've never been allowed to grieve it. And you never have to apologize for carrying that love with you. It is yours. It's never meant to leave us.
Yeah, love never dies because the physical body may be dead, but the relationship goes on. And love exists on the other side. Love exists in the afterlife. My daughter has proven that to me. I think Daniel has proven that to you. And, and I'm going to quote again Maurice Schwartz. My favorite quote from him is death ends a life, not a relationship. And I think if we understand that sometimes people will encourage us to heal, but healing means forgetting. And we never want to forget those people who touched our lives. Whether it was 13 years like for Daniel or 55 years like an ongoing relationship, those people are going to have an indelible effect. When they die, the landscape of our life changes because they're no longer present. And every loss demands that we deconstruct who we are and reconstruct a person now that represents where we are after that loss. And it's an ongoing works in progress because loss is every bit a part of our lives as as life itself. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I'll say grief, I when I was really in my grief, I asked a dear friend of mine who lost her beloved partner to cancer. I said, how did you deal with it? Like, what did you do? How have you survived? And she's like, Ash, she's like, when I lost my spouse, she said, my dentist, who had also lost her spouse, said to me, she said, when it comes to grief, it never goes away. It just gets different.
Yep.
And that's really what I found. My grief today is very different than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, especially 5 years ago now. 5.5 years ago is about when my grief opened up. So it never goes away, but it gets very different. And so when we talk about healing, right, we're not trying to erase that love. And I think that's also can be a barrier to healing for people too, is that they think if they heal, they'll lose it somehow. You won't lose it. You'll just live differently, it'll just be different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think different can also be a sign of growth if we look at it that way as well, too. I mean, if I was the same person I was in high school, you wouldn't want to talk to me. I mean, there's got to be, there's got to be growth. Although my wife still thinks I'm an overgrown adolescent, but that's another story. That's for another podcast. But I told her, hey, I just hit 70, so maybe I'll hit midlife, and by the time I'm 90, I'll probably be a senior. So she's still holding out hope for that. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, I mean, just every loss demands that we look at ourselves. It's just that we're always works in progress. We're always going to be. I tell my students, stay curious. Stay involved. Be skeptical, question, but don't debunk. Don't be a debunker. You know. So let's talk about your book. You've mentioned the book a couple of times. So as a good podcast host with active listening skills, that means I got to ask you about your book. Am I correct? Are we in sync?
I'm happy to share, Dave.
I know you are. Just like I said, sometimes I have a sense of humor when I do this. So, it's just having fun. But anyway, tell us about your book, Unhappy Achiever, and what you want individuals who read it to take away from it.
So I wrote Unhappy Achiever because they're sharing the story, and in the work that I do, I meet so many people who are on similar journeys of what I call unbecoming, right? And I use the word unbecoming because we always hear about becoming. And there's a couple things about that word. One is it suggests like we're trying to get somewhere. I'm trying to become. And for me, this journey I've been on has not been about becoming. It's been about sort of unbecoming all of the stuff that had obscured the truth of who I was. Because I really think we are already everything we need to be when we're born. It's just that life sort of piles on and hard things happen, and we sort of lose that connection to our truth, to our authenticity, to our hearts. And so we don't have to become everything, but we have to unbecome and peel back all of the stuff that buried the beautiful beings we were when we were born. And so I meet so many people on journeys of unbecoming, of grief, not just over losing, a loved one through death, but divorce, career, family relationships. There's so many forms of grief that are not just directly linked to death and dying, right? Every time we have a significant life change or transition, there is a grief process that needs to happen. And what I realized in that space of grief and unbecoming is that it can be intensely lonely. We can wonder what the heck is happening to us, whether we're losing our minds, whether we're going crazy, whether there's something wrong with us, right? And so I wanted to write a book that would read like a best friend's diary for everyone out there who is on a journey like that, to let them know they're not alone. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not crazy. And that if one very ordinary, marvelously mortal woman could conjure the courage to take that journey to her own depths, to survive grief as a crucible, to deconstruct an entire life that she built from the outside in, to rebuild one based on lessons of true love that she'd learned as a child from the inside out, then anybody else can do it too.
Well, it sounds like you provide a really good roadmap for that to happen. And, you made just a wonderful point earlier. When we're born with love. And there is this teaching from The Afterlife of Billy Fingers, my favorite book on the afterlife, that reads something to the effect of, why should we have to earn love when we're born with it already? And that is so true, but we're born with love, we're born with innocence, but then we get, we live the human experience, and we engage in human contracts that sometimes are controversial, that sometimes lead to rifts, that sometimes lead to us questioning our own self-worth, that we forget that we were born out of love. And if we can get back to that and become, which is kind of the trend now in business and life now, is heart-centered leadership. If we can get back to that heart-centered piece of us and realize that at the core, we're all loving, we compassionate human beings, it's I think it's going to help us get through the human experience and at least put that in context and not take everything that happens to us personally.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the last chapter of the book is the epilogue, and I write about exactly that love, right? That I think really the ultimate hero's journey for all of us is to return to that love,
Yep.
right? As you say, the innate beings that we were when we were born out of love. And when we're able to do that, we're able to live with more grace, with more compassion, with more empathy, because we have inhabited our own darkness, our own shadowy depths, our own suffering.
Yep.
Through grief or whatever that the hardship, the trauma that we've experienced has been. And when we've really reckoned with that darker aspect of ourselves, something happens. We don't just return to our hearts. We find our humanity, right? We see ourselves truly. And in that, we develop this infinite compassion and empathy for other people, right? We realize that we're just perfectly imperfect, like stumbling around, trying to figure it out, right? When I look at who I was 5.5 years ago and the ego and the arrogance, and I just have to laugh. Like, she just didn't know better. She thought she knew everything. I thought I knew everything, and I knew so little, actually. Or maybe more accurately, I forgot. And so, but now, having reckoned with my own humanness, my own, you know, shadows, I have infinite compassion for other people, and I'm able to then walk through life with so much more grace because I'm not taking everything so personally. I love myself unconditionally, and so I'm better able to extend that to others.
Well, you mentioned doing the shadow work. I mean, we have to sit the darkness as a result of our grief, as a result of our tragedy, because there's lessons in darkness. And it isn't, that's why we can have joy and sadness coexist. We can have anger and happiness coexist. It all has something to teach us if we allow it to. And we don't buy into this, well, you have to be happy crap that many in society believe is the key to fulfillment. And it isn't about just happiness, it's about embracing everything that is not happiness in order for us to find the unconditional love that's always, I think, always resided within us. So,
I love it. Yes, it is. As I say, it is being brave enough and alive enough to feel it all. Like, that's
mhm,
where aliveness is,
yeah,
not in this fake happy all the time. That's not what we're here to do. We're not here to be happy all the time. We're here to be brave and bold enough to feel it all,
yeah,
right? Because the saddest thing to me about our avoidance of death and dying and grief is that what I realized when I was sort of, you know, knocked to my knees overnight and suddenly inhabiting this space of darkness where I felt truly emotionally incapacitated, where all I could do in that moment was breathe and be. It's that in that darkness, I started to find my light again. In that darkness, there was so much light. In that grief, there was so much love. So if you avoid the hard stuff, you'll never really get to the good stuff either.
no,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're preaching to the choir on that one. So, I mean, I absolutely agree with you because I had to, in order for me to move through my grief after my daughter transitioned, I had to embrace the darkness. I had to embrace both the yin and the yang to get there. And we can't really truly deconstruct ourselves without going to understanding that light and dark, grief and love go hand in hand. So yeah, shadow work is among the most meaningful work, and I think the work that will give us a really probably more spiritual awareness and insight than anything else that we do.
Absolutely. And that's also why I love the word unbecoming, because someone actually said this to me about it. And I was like, oh, that's so true. They said, that's such a great word. It's such a great word because, it's when something's the opposite of beautiful, we say it's unbecoming on you, right? And that's sort of the stigma that we've attached to shadow, to darkness, to hard things, right? That they're just too unbecoming. We just need to avoid them. That's why having these conversations and normalizing just being in the mess
Mm,
sometimes, getting comfortable with unbecoming. It's messy. And
mm,
that's also what I really wanted to show in the book. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be in the mess,
mm,
right? This is why, in order to become the butterfly, caterpillars have to be reduced to caterpillar consommate. It's necessary. It's the only way. So let's normalize unbecoming. Let's normalize messiness. Sometimes life is really messy. Sometimes we don't feel beautiful or becoming. Some days aren't that way, and that's okay. Some seasons aren't that way, and that's okay.
Well, you've taught me a potential little recipe. I've never heard of caterpillar consomme before, but now I'm going to have to do some further research and see how many dishes we can make out of that. But thank you, Ashley. I'll never look at a caterpillar the same way again. So
It's one of my favorite analogies. I love that one.
and I'll tell you, just what I thought I heard everything. That's something that you taught me something new. So I will take that with me, and with your permission, use that at some point. So
You too.
all right, we're gonna do a little play off of comedian Jeff Foxworthy's line. You know you're a redneck if. So my question, okay, we're ready. So you're ready to play.
I'm ready to play.
All right. My question then is, you are an unhappy achiever if.
If you have gone from achievement to achievement, from goal to goal, from life milestone to life milestone, and it's just never enough. You never arrive at that place that you've been seeking, that place of happiness, of joy, of fulfillment, that penultimate place that you think will be the place where you stop feeling that inner restlessness, that constant call for something more, right? That place of never enough.
Mhm. Yeah, that would make perfect sense. I mean, because we can just go from goal to goal, accomplishment to accomplishment, and still feel empty. And a lot of times we chase accomplishments so we can avoid looking at the emptiness that we have inside. We may delude ourselves in thinking that accomplishment is fulfillment, and it really isn't. Because accomplishments are transient, love and learning to love ourselves is permanent.
Absolutely. And I say this as someone who built the picture perfect life, right? Who got the degrees, who got the accolades, the awards, who had the big house, the cars, the husband, the family, all of it,
Mhm.
and felt nothing. Didn't feel the way that I thought I would feel. And so, you know, I, with the exception of my 3 beautiful children, I had that life. I didn't feel the way that I thought I would feel, and I walked away from it without a plan, with really nothing but my heart saying, "You have to do this." And my head said, "What are you doing? You're great. You have no plan. Like, you've spent 15 years, your entire adult life, building this life, right? Getting to this place. And right as you've, gotten the dream home and the everything you were taught to want and thought you ever wanted, you're just going to walk away and start over." And so that's also the message I want to share, is that, you know, to do that, I was terrified, right? That was another kind of grief entirely. And I had to go from a life that felt set, one that felt like I would never have to worry about a thing, to jumping off of a cliff and praying that I would be caught. And so I want to say to people who, feel like they're in that space, if you're moving from your heart, you will be caught. I have never fallen. And the life that I've built, the life that I'm living today, is an absolute dream. It's not about things. It's about love. It's about the highest levels of love in every aspect of my existence. And nothing I'll ever have will give me that. That's something I had to cultivate from the inside out.
And it sounds like you've done, considering the hand of cards, the hand of cards of life dealt you, it sounds like you've done a fabulous job doing that, reinventing yourself from the inside out, because it obviously actually shows. I mean, you radiate love, you radiate calm, you just got a great energy about you, and it's obviously is a product of what you've done to cultivate love in yourself and for others. So I think just keep doing what you're doing. And maybe you can battle that formula and talk about it in your next book. So,
Well, I am the luckiest, Dave, because I get to meet incredible people doing incredible work like you are doing. You are helping so many people and taking the difficult hand that you were dealt, right? And the loss of your beautiful daughter and using that to cultivate love within yourself and then sharing that love with the world in conversations like this. And getting to meet people like you and have these conversations is part of my joy. And so thank you for that.
well, you're welcome. And, it's one of the gifts of the challenges I had after my daughter's Janine's transition was that I've met just really great individuals who transcended loss, transcended tragedy, and has inspired me and have inspired me to continue doing what I'm doing. So I thank you for being part of the individuals who have been a big part of that journey to keep me inspired and to where I have the privilege of learning from and hearing your stories because being witness to another person's story to me is the ultimate gift because it tells me that that person's going to trust me with the most intimate details and traumas of their lives. So I always consider it to be a privilege whenever somebody's willing to share their story with me privately or on the podcast. It keeps me going, keeps me inspired, and it keeps me a perpetual student because I learn from everybody.
I love it. Absolutely. It's my privilege to be here having this conversation with you. So,
Likewise, it's a privilege having you here. So, boy, I could talk to you for about another 2 hours, but I know you got things to do in your day. But I would ask you a couple other questions. First, and you've left our audience with so many good things today. You've left us with a lot of good stuff. But give our audience one ultimate takeaway for today that you want them to take with them.
mm, the one takeaway that I want to leave is that every single person listening to this is worthy of love. If we sort of close with the lesson that Daniel taught me, that the beauty of having someone love you that way at such a young age is that, as I said earlier, neither of us was old enough to do anything that meant something, right? Externally,
Mhm.
right? We hadn't lived long enough to do anything that would make us, quote, lovable. And the love just was. It just was. And so returning to that love reminded me that I was lovable by virtue of my being, not my doing, right? You don't have to earn love. You are worthy. You deserve love. You are enough. Every single person, doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter where you've come from, you are absolutely beloved always. Don't ever forget that.
Thank you, Ashley. That is a message that we all need to hear from time to time. So thank you. Now, my last question is going to give you a chance to promote yourself a little bit. If people want to contact you, purchase your book, Unhappy Achiever, find out more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can go to my website, ASH Jordan, JORDAN.com. They can go to unhappyachiever.com and they can find me on Instagram at Ms. MS Ash Jordan.
And I will make sure all of your contact information gets in the episode notes. So, and when our podcast goes live on YouTube and my other podcast platforms. So, Ashley, thank you so much for just a delightful, wonderful conversation. You again emanate just such a beautiful light, and thank you for sharing that light with our audience today.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Thank you.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.